President Abdel al-Sisi and his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron discussed earlier last week means to boost strategic bilateral relations as well as a host of regional developments, including in Libya. The meeting discussed the economic, commercial, military and security levels. President al-Sisi expressed to Macron Egypt's keenness to strengthen cooperation with France in various fields, especially in transferring French expertise and technology in all development fields to Egypt. The president also asserted to his French counterpart that Cairo seeks to increase coordination and consultation with Paris as the current chair of the European Union on the political, security, military and economic levels. Macron, for his part, expressed his country's pride in what he described as the strong and distinguished relations with Egypt, which he said gained more momentum during the recent multiple visits of President al-Sisi to France. The meeting also tackled the latest developments concerning a host of regional issues of common interest, including Libya. President al-Sisi and Macron agreed on exerting more efforts to help Libya restore security and stability, particularly through expelling mercenaries and foreign forces and eliminating terrorism. The two leaders also reviewed means of cooperation and coordination during the next UN Climate Change Conference, COP27, which is slated to take place in November 2022 in the Egyptian Red Sea city of Sharm el-Sheikh.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate. As I said in the beginning that tonight we'll be focusing on the presidential activities of President Abdel al-Sisi, more specifically the visit to France and the meeting, as we did know in the past report, the meeting of President Abdel al-Sisi and the French counterpart Emmanuel Macron, as it tackled a number of issues, not just about the climate change, but discussing the cooperation on different levels and the situation in the neighboring country of Libya for Egypt, as we will be focusing on the COP27, the climate change conference that will be held in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh in November. Engineer Rahman Ali Fahmi, climate change is very important nowadays to be discussing and making people aware of it, the dangers of climate change. How do you see the current impact of the climate change, not just for Egypt, but for Africa in general and for the world?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Actually, Africa is one of the most vulnerable lands to climate change when it comes to the risks associated with the climate impacts. So maybe Africa on an industrial and on a per capita level, they are not one of the biggest carbon emitters worldwide. Other continents contribute more. But Africa itself is one of the major areas which is impacted heavily by climate change and is at risk actually of any climate change happening in the area. Whether from sea level rise, temperature rise, increasing in the soil salinity, increasing in the ocean salinity. This is one of the main topics that they discussed in the One Ocean Summit. Water droughts, agriculture crops having been affected by different circumstances. So actually in a situation in which the continent is struggling with a couple of economic and developmental issues, it's very important right now to build the momentum across the global community, to focus more on Africa, because a lot of people will be damaged due to, as we saw in the COVID-19, the majority of people who were severely damaged were the developing countries. And the same will be happening if we faced a climate crisis. The infrastructure in Africa won't be able to withstand any crisis, whether climate or health, as we saw in COVID-19 crisis. So it's very important to draw the attention right now of the global community towards the Africa and especially towards the adaptation solution if we are talking about climate change.
Yes, more specifically on the African continent, everyone is saying that it is not fair for the Africans and for Africa as a continent to be bearing the responsibility of what has happened in the past few decades in the West, in the industrial countries, the more developed countries. How can those industrialized countries and more developed countries help Africa, as Egypt and the Africans should be helping themselves as well at the same time?
Exactly. And this is why actually it's very important that Egypt will be hosting COP27, because it will be focusing on the Africa continent. One of the main things that the countries tried to develop over the years, but they haven't yet came to a strong modality, is the climate finance. Climate finance, it both finances technology, it finances capacity building, and also policy level. But the most importantly, we have to discuss with the countries at the global north, if we say, to couple the mitigation finance with the adaptation finance. We see right now that all of the European countries, and for example, all of the northern hemisphere countries, they are moving towards climate mitigation, which is towards renewable energy, towards reducing the carbon footprint, and that's okay. But they have also to couple their finance in adaptation, how to make the communities who are much more in risk to be much more resilient for the future changes. Whether islands, whether coastal zones in Africa, communities who are living on agriculture activities. So we have to couple both the adaptation and mitigation finance and direct that towards the most vulnerable countries and continents as Africa. Also, one of the topics that they have been discussing for years is the climate justice. And this is the key point that you are talking about, which is the people in the developing countries shouldn't be bearing all of the impacts of climate change alone, and they are struggling with their economies and basic life necessities. They have to be supported by well-developed countries who are actually contributing to the climate change quite heavily right now.
Yes, but could those countries be accepting new regulations and restrictions that could be affecting their economies as well in the future?
This is actually, you know, COVID-19 showed us that impacts in any part of the region will impact all of us. So climate crisis is even much more worse because, for example, in the health crisis, when they stopped the airport and traveling, they wanted to limit the spread of the coronavirus. Climate crisis, you won't be able to stop the weather from changing. You won't be able to stop crisis from transmitting from different areas. We have seen in the last summer some fires happening in areas that we are not familiar that it's fire areas. So, for example, in Algeria, which is an African country, they faced a lot of fires. This is not a normal phenomena that happens every day. So climate change is unpredictable. We have to work collectively towards that. And this is also the role of the COP27 team and the host country to push and convince the global north to start focusing on Africa, to start supporting the climate adaptation innovation, to have a more, could we say, a more defined modality for climate finance, how we can, for example, promote concessional loans to those developing countries in order to help them adapt and mitigate and be much more resilient to climate change. So this is actually, yes, you have a very good argument, but this is the rule of the global south and the African continents, and I think no better country than Egypt to speak for Africa and to drive the global community towards focusing more in Africa and Africa's right to be much more resilient for climate change in the future.
Yes, Egypt will be hosting the COP27 in November in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. How do you see the efforts of Egypt under this political leadership, under the tenure of President Abdel al-Sisi, to be giving more awareness to every Egyptian, every ordinary Egyptian about climate change? What is climate change and how could it be affecting them in the future? How do you see the efforts in the past 5 or 6 years?
Yes, exactly. Climate change falls the umbrella of sustainable development, and as you know, sustainable development have been one of the main strategies that the government adopted since 2014. So we currently have Vision 2030, and within this vision, a lot of projects which is climate related have been implemented on ground or at least planned. So we can see right now a growth in the renewable energy markets, okay, and especially we have right now one of the biggest solar farms in the whole world, in Benban, in Aswan. We saw a lot of projects when it comes to wastewater treatment and water desalination. We have seen a lot of projects when it comes, there is a lot of magnificent projects to protect the coastal zones in Kafr al-Sheikh, done by the government in collaboration with the UNDP. So we saw a lot of projects under the umbrella of Sustainability Vision 2030, and it serves climate change directly. But this year it's much more important to raise the awareness on, because maybe the awareness on sustainability and environment have been communicated the last 5 years, I would say. But now we have to focus more on climate change, because people started to realizing, for example, that there might be some problems with the crops that they are growing. There might be some problems with the soil salinity, because you know when the ocean salinity increases, then the groundwater attacks the soil and the salinity increases, and this affects the crops very much. So they have to be aware, especially those people who are either living on the coastal zones or are affected by the climate change directly. They have to be aware, and awareness is not a luxury. Awareness is a necessity to fight climate change and to be resilient and more adaptive to climate change. So it's very important, and I think this year is very critical, because the momentum that is built on COP27. COP27 at the end is a political process that engages the governments from everywhere. But the Egyptian society and the governments and the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Planning, and all of those definitely hand in hand with the private sector and with the civil society, they have to increase the awareness among the communities who are much vulnerable to climate change, people in remote areas and so on. So it's very important to raise the awareness, and I believe that the success stories we have in sustainability topics and sustainability projects will be also the same case for the climate change projects in Egypt.
What is the importance for Egypt to be hosting the COP27? Because we saw the participation of President Assisi in the COP26 in the UK in Glasgow. What is the importance of having such a global platform here in Egypt to be representing Africa and the Arab world at the same time, to be helping the cause?
Yes. Africa and Egypt are the future of green investments, whether in the mitigation or the adaptation, innovation, or businesses. So I think drawing the attention to the African continent and the Egyptian economy in specific will give a very, very good boost for even much more better than the economic growth that we are experiencing right now. But especially in the green area, when it comes to waste management projects, more adaptation projects, more smart agriculture and smart irrigation projects. This momentum, which is going to be built during COP27, will give a boost to the Egyptian economy, the Egyptian SMEs, the Egyptian small and medium enterprises, who compromises more than 85% of the Egyptian economy. They not necessarily work in climate or environmental related value chains or businesses, but actually they have the chance to start greening their value chains. They have the chance to start thinking about new products and new services that could be exported to Europe, because you know Europe have launched the Green Deal last year, and actually the Green Deal will impose a lot of restrictions on the goods received by the EU. So actually the Egyptian industry, in order to have a competitiveness against every other industry, they have to abide with these regulations, and those regulations are, majority of them are about the environment, so we have to change. Also the African market, and I usually say that for example the renewable energy market in Egypt still have some potential, especially in the off-grid market, but we have another opportunity in the African continent. We can deliver the service to another neighboring countries who don't have access to sustainable energy, and we provide them with the expertise, with the solutions, and this is a very, very good prosperity model for our businesses. So I mean, for Egypt, it's very important to give a boost to the green economy in Egypt. We have seen last year the country issued the green bonds to invest large-scale projects. This is one of the very good tools to finance large-scale projects. But the momentum in COP27 will be even given much more boost to the green economy on different scales, small enterprises, medium enterprises, and corporations, and big scale projects.
During the One Ocean Summit in France and the participation of President Abdel Fattah His Excellency spoke about the oceans as an indicator of climate change. How can this be regarded in the future?
Exactly. The most affected ecosystem by rise in temperature is the oceans, actually. Oceans are very affected by any rise in temperature. They are responsible for very critical substances that we live on. So it's not very common to know that oceans produce oxygen more than the forests for us to breathe. We normally relate to forests that they are giving us oxygen and taking in CO2, and that's a fact, but oceans are much more producing to oxygen through the coral reefs and the plants inside the oceans. Number two, definitely we have the fishing industry and all of the people who are living in this industry. Any rise in temperature will increase the salinity of the water, and definitely some species of the fish might not be able to withstand such salinity. Also, it attacks, as I said, it attacks the soil that we plant on, especially in the coastal zones, and such thing affects also the crops that we plant on coastal zones. You know, Egypt have one of the biggest coastal line across the continent. We have coastal line across the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. We have the tourism industry built on that resources, but we also have other industries built on that resources. So for us, it's critical not only to protect the environment from our side, but to raise awareness across the global community, because it's one ocean. Because it's not a, you know, it's not just a word. Many of times we saw products from the global farther north landing on our beaches. Those products are contaminated. We don't know the substances and so on. So it's connected. The sea water and the ocean water are connected, and every single thing that happens to the climate change affects the oceans badly. This is why it was very important for the Egyptian government to participate and the Egyptian president to participate, and he also committed to the same agreement that they had in One Ocean Summit.
So the main characteristics of the oceans and the seas, they change due to climate change. And how can we be reversing this process in the future to be preserving the environment and the oceans in specific?
Yes, this is number one, will be not a one-day process, but it's a stages, a full, I would say, national project that should take place. And actually there is a couple of projects taking place right now, like Eco Egypt, which is a partnership between the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Tourism. So number one, we have to raise awareness across the coastal communities, people who are living either in Alexandria, in Marsa Matruh, or on the Red Sea coasts, about the different aspects of dealing with this environment, and very sensitive environment. When it comes to the waste littering, when it comes to spoiling oils or spoiling substances inside the sea, the fishing behavior, because this is very important. The fishing behavior should be, and I think the government have done some quite good, especially in the protectorate and in the Red Sea, some good policies to prevent what they say, the overfishing of the resources over there. The recreational activities that takes place, whether diving or other activities that tourists do, it has to be usually revisited and reconsidered how this affects the ecosystem. You can see that for a couple of years, coral reefs in the Red Sea have been damaged by the unconsciousness of the tourists, and whether they are national or international. And the coral reefs is the main pillar of this ecosystem, because it's a house for fish, it's food for other fish, but it's also produce oxygen, which is necessary for the creatures living in the ocean. So raising awareness across the coastal communities, this is something very important. establishing resilient adaptation projects when it comes to protecting those zones from any sea level rise happening. This is very essential. So projects, and there is a magnificent example that is done in Kafr al-Sheikh by the local community with the support of the government to have a normal sand dams in front of the sea to protect any potential sea level rise from destroying the crops, the agriculture crops, and consequently the country. And definitely having a regulation when it comes to fishing and the tourism and leisure industry over there, and working with other neighbor countries. So we share the Red Sea with neighbor countries, we share the Mediterranean, and actually this conference was also including a couple of Mediterranean countries. We have to support and open this discussion, because the bad effect might not be from our side, but it will affect us on a touristic level or an agricultural level or in a fish industry level. So open the discussion with the countries around us, work with the local community to find solutions. This is very important. Those two things on the long term will help us preserve our very beautiful coastal zones. We have one of the very, if not the best, beautiful diving sites in the whole world. If you asked any scuba diver, the coral reefs, the beautiful of fishes over there, it's something magnificent. We have to preserve that, and we have to work with our regional partners to preserve not only this two seas, but the whole marine life.
Yes, as an expert here in Egypt, do you think that the people living at the coastal areas you've mentioned, Kafr al-Sheikh, for example, Alexandria, Marsa Matruh, the people living within Egypt in general and in those areas in specific, are they interested in knowing more about climate change, in preventing the impact of climate change, or are they just aware of the problem?
They are aware of the problem, and if they knew that climate mitigation and climate adaptation and resilience is the solution for the problem, they will be engaged much more. And they will be actually, because this is something that you can see from the opportunity. For example, in Kafr al-Sheikh, they had the problem of the salty water attacking their crops and attacking their cities. That's the problem, okay? When they worked with the experts over there in Alexandria and in Kafr al-Sheikh and with the government to build this very local-driven sand dams, which is protected by some certain structure in order not to have erosion or something, something like that, they felt ownership that they are built this project by their hands, and this is going to protect them. It's the same case. They are aware of the problem, that for example, people living in the Red Sea, they usually tell you that there was a lot of species that we saw in the past that we don't see right now. Why do you think is the problem? What do you think is the problem? Maybe he's not familiar. The overfishing, the people who do overfishing for some species of the fish, those people affected this community who didn't fish, maybe they fished like wisely, and also they enjoyed some recreational activities in this area. So they are aware of the problem. Once they have complete picture that the climate adaptation and resilience and climate action is something that is going to help them, they will definitely be engaged, and they will be owning this momentum, which is the major important thing for the sustainability of any project that we do, is the ownership of the local community.
Yes, during the One Ocean Summit in France, President Al-Sisi also said that Egypt will be using the platform of the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh to be speaking more and having more regulations and ambitious, I would say, punishments regarding the sustainability and the diversity of the marine life, to be protecting them.
Yes.
How can we be doing that in November?
Yes, the World Bank launched a report recently indicating that the MENA region is losing around 3% of its GDP due to the pollution happening by plastics inside the ocean. So it's not just environmental impact, it's economic impact. So actually it's not a luxury that we need our environment to be looking good and so on. It's an economic impact on our economy and other neighboring economies. So as a country, as a continent who is surrounded by several seas and ocean, as Africa, and as Egypt, which is one of the major industries is the tourism industry, and it's built on the resources in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. I think the political willingness and the political drive will be able to convince other governments to abide and to set regulation. This is what is all about COP, is to convince other governments to abide to certain regulation and agree in certain articles to ban, for example, single-use plastic products, to have some certain fees or penalties on overfishing, to work together across the African continent to work on the resilience of coastal communities. So I trust that this is the political will of the Egyptian government and the Egyptian president, and this have to be translated into negotiations with the parties from all over the world to agree to issue policies, regulations, and terms in COP27 that protects the marine life in general. And I hope this can take place. This could be one of the very good outcomes of COP27.
Yes, one of the outcomes, or the expected outcomes, to be having more speakers from African countries and Arab countries, especially that the COP27 will be held in an African Arab country such as Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh. Can this maybe give the spotlight to Africa and the Arab world about what we are focusing on here and the problems that we have here regarding climate change? Can this make it easier for the world to hear us?
Yeah. You know, this COP and the COP following will be also held in the United Arab Emirates. So I'm very happy that the MENA region will be of focus, at least for the next two COP. I would say we have to present the African solutions and the African innovations in combating climate change, because solutions that's taking place in Europe might work in Africa and might not work in Africa. But the local solutions, it's a much more powerful. And trust me, because I work in this area, there is a lot of innovative, very innovative and world-class African solutions to combat climate change in the area of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. What they are lacking many things. They are lacking access to data, they are lacking access to technology, and most importantly, lacking access to finance. So, showcasing those innovations on a public and private level, this has to be one of the main agenda and topics covered in COP27, because we should stop looking for the global north to give us inspiration and solutions. We have to look inside ourselves for the local communities, inside our entrepreneurs, our innovators, our academic sector, our public and private sector. We have to stimulate those ecosystems to start solving problems that we have in climate change. Yes, definitely the much more developed countries can help us financially with advice, with their expertise, and that's something we appreciate. But the ownership and the, I would say, the spark behind this innovation should be African-led. And trust me, I've seen a lot of African innovations in the climate sector. It was really world-class innovations that just need the right resources to boom and be maybe one of the global unicorns, startups or businesses very soon.
Yes, spark coming out of Africa in the COP27 that will be held in Egypt for the first time in the African continent and the Arab world in the month of November in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. We'll be having more details about the COP27 and the One Ocean Summit in the upcoming report.
President Abdel al-Sisi called in his speech to the One Ocean Summit in France for intensifying international efforts to protect the seas and oceans from negative effects resulting from climate change. He told the summit that the international efforts to overcome these effects on the seas and oceans were still not up to the hoped-for level at the present. President al-Sisi's participation in the Brest summit came in response to an invitation of French President Emmanuel Macron. The president told the summit that Egypt would seek during its presidency of the UN Climate Change Conference COP27, slated in November this year, to urge the world to preserve the sustainability and the diversity of marine life. The President stressed that the COP27 would witness a constructive dialogue on this issue, with the aim of producing ambitious results and developing initiatives that build on the outcomes of the Third United Nations Ocean Conference. President Sisi also announced that Egypt has joined the declaration and initiatives coming out of the summit, including the Protecting the Ocean, a Time for Action Declaration, and the Global Ocean Alliance, and the High Ambitious Alliance for Nature and People initiatives. He also underlined how climate change ramifications pose a constant threat by raising the level of seas and oceans of coastal areas in many countries of the world.
Welcome back. You're still watching the daily debate, still focusing on the participation of President Abdel Fattah as we did see in the past report in the One Ocean Summit in the French city of Brest, and the meeting of President Abdel Fattah with a number of world leaders, including the French President Emmanuel Macron. Engineer Rahman Ali Fahmy, President Sisi also said during the participation in this summit that the efforts of preventing climate change are still not up to the level that we need and that is expected from the world leaders at the present time. How would you see this statement?
Yes. In Paris, the Paris Agreement in 2015 was a very good stage that the whole world agreed to work together to limit any increase in temperature, the global temperature, to make it below 1.5 degrees. And this is a huge milestone to have global emitters like the big countries and also the developing countries to commit to such agreement. But after the Paris Agreement, we haven't seen any global action that indicates that we are going towards that target. Until now, statistics say that we are maybe below 2 degrees in increase, but we are no way near the 1.5 degrees of increase in the global temperature rise, which is the temperature that we can bear as an ecosystems and as agriculture activities and so on. COP26 in Glasgow, the objective was to bring people together back after the pandemic. After the pausing, the main objective was to bring people back on the table, to have a discussion and to start working together collaboratively on the agenda of the Paris Agreement. I think now, and this is actually one of the words that the President said, we need to see action on the ground. And I hope that COP27 will be the platform in which we see action on the ground. Enough talking, we have to see action right now. From the biggest countries who are contribute to the climate change to the smallest countries who are vulnerable to climate change and climate risk. So we have to work together. It's very good message that this is happening in Africa, one of the major continents which is affected by climate change, is very vulnerable to climate change. So we need to see action on the ground. And actually, one of the very good things that's going to happen, that the Egyptian government will set a model of the green Sharm, as they said. It will be a city in which with very low carbon emissions, hopefully tends to neutral, zero, and it's still operating with full of its capacity and accepting tourists and so on. It's a very good milestone. It's not an easy one, but it's a very good ambition for the Egyptian government. We have saw in the past years the very brave decision that's done in the governorate of Hurghada, the Red Sea, to ban the single-use plastic bags over there, because they found it very affecting the ecosystem and the marine life over there. It was a very brave decision at that time. I believe that a lot of similar actions and similar projects will be implemented in Sharm el-Sheikh, whether greening the transporting, and I have heard from officials from the Ministry of Electricity and Renewable Energy, and also the Ministry of Urban Planning and the Ministry of Environment, definitely, then there is a lot of effort to be done on Sharm el-Sheikh. This is to set an example that a city which is one of the main cities in Egypt can go green and can be carbon neutral as much as we can, and give the message to the attendees that we need to see action on the ground. We need to support the African resilience when it comes to the climate change. Whether, you know, in COP26 in Glasgow, the Prime Minister of the UK indicated that Alexandria is one of the major cities which might disappear from the map due to sea level rise. So we are not talking about something very far away. We are talking about cities that this is the second largest city in Egypt. So the global community have to work together. I hope that they can start showcasing actions and clear roadmaps in COP27, and hopefully also in COP28 in UAE, which is also shedding the light on the same area, which is the Middle East and North Africa.
Why haven't we seen results on the ground? We can see decisions and texts and communiques at the end of the conferences, but nothing concrete on the ground. Does this mean that we are still focusing on the economy and the money and not the environment and the future?
Yes. Before COVID, the global community had a misconception that the economy is something that we can focus on alone and let go of other sectors. Actually, we have saw the COVID impacts on the economy. It was like a global economic crisis, by a health crisis. Guess what? The climate crisis is much more damageable to the economy. So we are working on the economy. We should be working on the economy through the climate action, through climate mitigation and climate adaptation. Why we didn't see any action? Because the COP is all about a political process. It's all about convincing other governments to agree and to put their hands on the table and start working. So in Paris Agreement, this was led by the French government, they managed to bring the whole world to sign the Paris Agreement, and it was a very brave stage by their side. The objective behind Glasgow COP26 was to bring people back to the table, because people started to focus on other things and started to forget about the Paris Agreement. I hope that the efforts done by Egypt this year will be able to grasp the momentum, build the momentum across the global community to start acting on the ground, to start having a concrete modalities on climate finance. Until now, a lot of pledges on financing climate from the global north to the global south have been made. We have heard millions of billions of US dollars to be mobilized. How much have been mobilized? Very little. Why? There is no clear modality on financing, how this finance will do. Is it a concessional loan? Is it an investment? Is it what kind of investment I'm mobilizing? So I hope that, and also Ambassador Mohammed Nasr, the lead negotiator of Egypt in COP26, in the World Youth Forum, indicated that one of the main topics that the government will be focusing on in COP27 is climate finance. And this is a very good indicator, because it's one of the major problems. Climate finance, climate technology, and the capacity building, those three main pillars is inside the COP, and the role of Egypt this year is to foster the global community to support those three major things. Capacity building for community, raising awareness for experts, for the national governments to act towards climate. Technology, to mobilize technology from both the south to the north and vice versa, to support the technology development, and most importantly, the climate finance.
Yes, how do you see climate finance here in Egypt, to be specific, in the past 7 or 8 years under the tenure of President Sisi? Because we can see new roads, infrastructure, building cities, a new capital, and this of course is taking care of the economy and taking care of having more money for the future generations and making it easier for the future generations. But we would like to make it safer as well for the future generations in terms of the climate change. How do you see the amount of the climate finance here in the country now?
Yes. Working on the country's infrastructure directly impacts the country's resilience towards climate change. Roads are one of the most, if not planned correctly, are one of the most carbon emitters problems. Any digestions, any unnecessary long roads, any accidents, they are one of the major contributors to carbon emissions worldwide. So enhancing the infrastructure when it comes to road and having much more safer, as you said, roads, this is very essential to the carbon emissions and the pollution inside the cities. This is very important. And we will see this impacts once the national projects finishes, how this committed or contributed to decreasing the air pollution in the big cities. Also, recycling the wastewater. Okay, this is a very good project that the government started to work on, because in the past, the wastewater and the drainage system used to not only be drained in the Nile, but also in other lakes, which contains some fisheries and some other plants that the local communities live on. Now, and specifically I'm speaking about Manzala's lake. Manzala's lake was horrible until the cleaning project started to take place, and then they directed a very big part of the wastewater being dumped into this lake to be recycled and to be treated and used in agriculture crops. So definitely any infrastructure work and any infrastructure project definitely helps the country to be much more resilient and adaptive to climate change.
Yes, at the One Ocean Summit in France, President Sisi also announced that Egypt will be joining the final declaration and the initiatives of the One Ocean Summit. What does this say about the future of the country, that we are heading towards a greener future, a greener economy, to be preserving the environment and preventing climate change for the future, not just for Egypt, but for the Arab world, for Africa, and for the world?
Yeah, as you said, it's very critical for Egypt right now to communicate and showcase that we are building a greener future for our country. This is not only in joining the declarations, but this has actually happened in some projects in Benban, in Aswan, in wastewater treatment, in agriculture sector, in coastal zones, and so on. So it's very important to set the example that we commit to the global momentum happening on the green level, and we do as well. And we are ready to support other countries in the Arabic region or in the African region to start building their green future. This is a very good opportunity for the Egyptian private sector to start delivering services in neighboring countries. We have a lot of trade agreements with Africa that we could utilize. It will create much more jobs for the Egyptian people to start supporting the African and the Arabic continent within building their green future, whether in the renewable energy, in the waste management, in the agriculture, in the irrigation, in the water treatment. Every single topic, we have the right expertise, we have the right entrepreneurs, we have the right businesses to start helping our neighbors and our citizens in the African continent. So it was very good, and Africa, Egypt, as you said, is a leading country right now on different scales. On a Mediterranean scale, it's a leading country. On an Arabic scale, it's a leading country. On an African scale, it's a leading country. So I hope that other countries will get the inspiration from what has been done on the ground, and to be translated into collaboration with Egypt in having much more greener projects in the future.
Yes, we're always speaking about the greener economy, the green economy and the Egypt, green Egypt, the green gas, the green resources, but there's the blue economy now, and we've heard about it during the summit, the One Ocean Summit in France. What is the blue economy, and how can it be translated on the ground as well?
Yes, the blue economy is any activity associated or happening within the seas and the ocean, whether this economy is industrial, touristic, leisure. This is what forms the blue economy. And because for countries like us, we depend on the ocean, or not the ocean, depend on the seas for food, for income, foreign currency income, for transport, for several activities, we have to preserve and develop this blue economy in a more sustainable way, not only ourselves, but with other countries, to preserve the ecosystem that we are using right now. We are depending on the sea in several activities. Tourism, a lot of industries are located nearby the sea for the purpose of having a salty water neighboring to them. Transport, we have one of the, if not the main road of global export, the Suez Canal. This is also considered a blue economy because we are using the water resources over there. So we have to preserve and work with our stakeholders to preserve the blue economy in Egypt and in other areas, to stop the littering of waste, and specifically the inorganic waste inside the ocean, because it impacts the ocean very heavily. And this is one of the outcomes of the summit, that they will work together to limit and ban any littering of plastic, especially to the oceans, because there was a report, a global report says that the average persons eat around 18 kilograms of plastics during his or her lifetime. Imagine you are eating 18 kilograms of plastics. Where is this coming from? You don't see the microplastics that is inside the fishes that in the sea. You don't see the microplastics inside the water, for example, that you are maybe drinking and desalinated and so on. So it's not about also only environment. It's environment, economy, health, social. It's all connected right now. And the most example to indicate that everything is connected is COVID-19 and what happened to the global economy during COVID-19. So I hope that COP27 will be a huge leap, transformation for the global community, to start taking action, to start concentrating on Africa, to invest in Africa and in Egypt as one of the very good countries for investments right now, and to build the momentum to support the Egypt's green and blue economy alike. That will give a boost to the private sector and the entrepreneurs who are thriving to build impact in Egypt and in the continent.
Yes, exactly. Engineer Rahman Ali Fahmy, the climate change and the sustainable development expert. Thank you very much for being with us tonight on the Daily Debate.
Thank you, my pleasure. Thank you.
Anytime. And this brings us to the end of the Daily Debate for tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.